Formerly wealthy redditors who lost it all. What happened? My driving instructor used to be rich. He had a gym inside a shopping center in the center of the city. Then he did a stupid deal where he tried to sell it and didn't get all the details in writing. He intended to be partial owner, but he messed up. So the new owner simply kicked him out. What stuck with me is that he kept defending himself. It was understood verbally that, well, I made that mistake too, though for only $200 or so. Anything about money, you gotta treat like a business. Verbally is the bane of everything. People need to lawyer up hard and get these things in proper writing. Not me, but my sister-in-law. She inherited $260k at the age of 18 and it was gone by the time she was 21. She also dropped out of high school and got a flashy apartment downtown because she thought she was set for life. She peed away on 3 brand new vehicles at once, paying her boyfriend's child support, letting him steal money, and just buying a bunch of stupid crap. $130 yoga pants, $600 bed sheets. She's broke now, doesn't have anything going on. Another guy I went to HS with inherited $60k senior year. He bought a brand new 2013 GT 500 Mustang in cash. He totaled it less than a month later, and never put insurance on it. So he went from having $60k cash to being sued for some old lady's medical bills and her total car in 4 weeks. Last I heard he's still making payments to her 5 years later. That last one is like a guy I went to high school with. He ended up getting $100k at age 18. First thing he did was buy a brand new car. Next thing he did was give money to all his friends. He even stood out on the street corner in his low income neighborhood and handed out $100 bills one day. Money was gone in about a month or so. The Somali Civil War. My grandfather had a manufacturing company, but the war ruined it. My family used our last $500,000 to get our relatives out of the country. A noble sacrifice. My so's great-grandmother was of minor Greek nobility, had tons of old money from somewhere. When she got old, her children decided to put her in the most expensive old people's home they could find, thinking she'd kick it in a year or two. Ended up living there for 15 years, completely draining the family fortune. I think it's hilarious actually. Not me, but my wife's brother. He was a multimillionaire and now essentially lives on social security and a small commercial property he collects rent on. He made his money in the gift industry. He had a piece of Beanie Babies, charm bracelets, things like that. The industry just cratered around 2004 or so. He lost all his money by investing in rock collectibles like a Hofner bass signed by all 4 Beatles, a copy of Sgt. Pepper's also signed by all 4 Beatles, etc. Tons of stuff. Paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for some of it. All bogus, all fake. He bought all the stuff on trips to Hawaii, and the dealer was outed as a fraud. He sued, but was unable to recover any of the money, mostly because other people had sued the guy first and cleaned him out. He also blew through $1 million of it on just toys, electronics, computers, gigantic TVs, etc. He lost all his money by investing in rock collectibles. When I read this, my first though was like rare geodes or something and I wanted to yell Jesus Christ, Marie. The Vietnam War. According to my uncle, my father was considered one of the wealthiest men in Saigon prior to the war. He was the owner of an incredibly popular flour making factory and was very famous. Our family lived right next to the mayor and had a tremendously huge estate with several luxury cars. Keep in mind this is 1960s in a third world country. Anyways, after the VC began to win the war, suddenly our literal piles of money in our rooms were worthless. I believe he had gotten about the equivalent of $100 for what were millions prior to the war. They had to evacuate from Vietnam and half of my family was caught while the half that I was in was able to escape by boat to Thailand and fly over to America. My dad was caught and sent to a POW camp, but managed to escape. I'll save that story for another time. Prior to fleeing, my father gave explicit instructions to our grandma to never sell the estate, because it would be worth a ton more in the future. However, my uncles eventually pressured her into selling the land while he was in the POW camps and ran away with the money. My dad was never able to forgive her for that and took that bitterness with him to the grave. Luckily our mother had tons of jewelry that she brought over to America. She slowly had to sell these pieces off in order to sponsor our arrival and fund the family while they struggled to find jobs here. I had never experienced the level of wealth that my older siblings grew up with, but I can definitely see some forms of entitlement that they still have to this day. To be honest, I'm sort of glad that I grew up in poverty. It has shaped me into who I am today. Although I am moderately wealthy as a pathologist, I hope to impart the same level of modesty onto my children as well. Alright buddy, now we need that POW escape story. I'm in one of those businesses that the internet made less necessary. Think video stores, travel agents, newspapers, etc. It's like having the best horse show shop in town, 10 years after the car was invented. I knew a guy in high school who inherited 6 figures from his grandfather. He peed away on a fast car and balls. He was so broke come senior year he enlisted in the National Guard. He was partying one night, a few years later, in a wilderness area, was drunk and slipped in a creek and drowned. Tragic. At least he enjoyed the money. A friend of mine was originally raking in 6 figures. He bought a large house with a loan in 2007 before its price crashed and he was left with negative equity. He was then let go from his executive job as his company and now working nearly 60 hours a week to make ends meet. Makes me glad that I only purchased a townhouse in 2007 before the market tanked. We were able to find renters after moving to a larger house in 2012 and finally sold it this year for a small profit. It took 10 years for that dank thing to finally come up enough to not lose money. Wasn't exactly wealthy, but my dad made some nice money until he quit his high-paying job to start a failing business. Now my mom works nearly all day while he still tries to make his business succeed while we rely on money from my grandma. My sister-in-law's dad won $250,000 at the local casino. Lo and behold, his crazy ex-wife, her biological mother, wanted to give their marriage a second try. This was a bad combo since together they form a bat crap crazy tornado and burn through the money in less than 6 months on alcohol, vacations, weed, and pills. After most of the money had dried up, his wife filed for divorce again and took what was left. She's a cold-hearted snake. Lifestyle creep would be the answer to what happened. People's spending usually swells to their income, and when that income is gone, well, you know the rest. My sis put a bid on a gorgeous house, a custom-built house that cost the owner well over $1 to build. The owner ran a video store chain which finally went belly up in 2005. He lost everything. His money, his marriage, everything, because he spent the money as fast as it was coming in. My sis put a $650,000 bid in on the house, which was accepted, but she ended up walking anyway because she just decided it was too much house for her and her family, and she didn't like how close it was to the neighboring houses. Whoever did eventually buy it got a great deal though. The house itself was amazing. She just decided it was too much house for her. Disaster avoided. SW the housing crash in 07/08. I know a guy who found a 47-ounce gold nugget while metal detecting in Australia, then spent every penny of it on stupid crap. It's like winning the lotto. Most people don't know how to handle the money and lose it all real fast. I won't say wealthy, but I did have $50,000 in my savings account. I got arrested for selling pot to a few friends and a fake friend of a friend, and it's hard finding work as a felon. Sorry to hear that. Hope you land on your feet. My dad was wealthy. His business was automotive related and he was making $600K a year. When economy on that went, so did his business. My parents divorced. Less than a year later we were on food stamps and government assistance. A lot more happened, but to be honest, it was a humbling time. Makes you appreciate what you have because tomorrow, literally, could be gone. Well, my family was part of the nobility and then they backed the parliamentarians during the English Civil War. Worked out great, until the Restoration. Then we became poor farmers. I'm not wealthy, but the siblings on my mother's side, her sisters and one brother, fell upon a huge chunk of cash in Korea when the Korean government was buying land to build the new Incheon airport. Apparently the boys in an inheritance get the most money, so that the brother took most of it and burned it. He is not responsible. The amount was about $1 million back in the early 90s, and this was an even bigger sum back then. A good friend of mine inherited 150k. He spent it on his college tuition but never really chose a major and just this semester chose to study business. He's now a 23-year-old freshman who has been in college for 4 years already, paying out of state tuition. He also threw a bunch of money at his old crappy drift car. I'd imagine he's running low on that fund now. There seems to be a phenomenon with people who get lucky and confuse luck with ability acumen. I know 3 people at different times that all got jobs due to who they knew rather than what they knew. 2 in oil, 1 in ag HR. Think scheduling 500 labors for a week during harvest. All made 200k, 300k. After several years of this, all 3 left to do their own thing. 1 started a gun business, 1 started his own ag HR business, 1 started flipping houses. In 07. Within about a year all of them were broke. Remember people, if you got your high paying job brought a series of lucky strokes rather than a great degree, working your way up, or being the innovator. Don't confuse luck with skill. Drove me nuts that these guys would give all types of career and financial advice too. I haven't lost it all, but my net worth has dropped by about 70% over the past 6 or 7 years from the mid 7-figure range. The first reason was due to cancer. Not so much the medical bills but the physical fallout since that time has kept me out of work quite a bit. The second reason was the dating, the engagement, the marriage and the divorce of the ex-wife. During our years together, she proved to be such a money W and a complete parasite to the bank book. Thankfully we had no children. First reason isn't really your fault, mate. Hopefully everything gets better in 2018. You do not even have to be wealthy to spend like everything like a moron. I have so many friends in school who have $100,000 to $300,000 in student loans, yet they are always vacationing and eating out. My boyfriend's family should be careful. They have high incomes but spend frivolously. Take out 5 times a week. Multiple gifts for 50 plus people. The latest gadgets. They also buy new cars every 5 years but don't have the money to buy a car outright when they should. 200k, 400k income. It's not my place to tell them what to do, but if they lose their jobs they are absolutely in trouble. I don't know, but that doesn't sound like they are overspending. Take out gadgets and cars /5y isn't too much for someone making 200k, 400k. Not me, but my mother and her parents. My grandfather was working for a subsidiary of NASA during the space race. My grandmother did secretary work at local schools. The two were supporting 4 children and still staying upper middle class. They didn't live lavishly and my grandparents saved enough money to put all 4 kids through college. Then Nixon cut the space program. They had to use all of their savings to live as my grandfather couldn't find a job anywhere because he was too overqualified. By the time any of the kids were old enough to get into college they had no money to help them through, and couldn't qualify for any financial aid that there was since their father made too much previously. Dad ditched inheriting the family real estate company to become a freaking manager at Wal-Mart and finally get out of our hometown. It could be more Carl kind of thing. On one hand, he could be 90k as a manager, and spend vacation and lots of time with his kids. On the other hand, he could be making 400k, but work 12 hours a day 7 days a week. Family businesses don't really have labor laws to follow for family members. Not me, but one of my dad's friends. We'll call him Dan. Dan ran a company and made money. He was also a veteran and gets disability also. Dude sold his company to his brother and son. Worked until he retired, got retirement and lived well in his Lakeview property. Then he died. His son stole the company from his uncle and expected to get his inheritance. He didn't have one. His dad gave it away to a 26-year Brazilian bombshell who worked 2 jobs so she could send money to her relatives. The first job was a cashier and the other was a caretaker for Dan. Dan, unknown to all of us, had a tumor in his brain, a growth in his lungs, and bones growing in his penis. Guy was dying painfully and no one knew, except for the Brazilian caretaker. They legally married and she got everything as per the will. I still meet with her time to time. She works as a caretaker at a facility for the mentally and physically handicapped. She still has his last name. Dan's son needed that inheritance because he took out loans and is in heavy debt. His uncle is suing him successfully, and he owes child support for 6 kids. He lives in a trailer now and his uncle rebuilt the company. So more a tale about my family mom than me. In the 90s my mom quit working for Wendy's to start a house cleaning service. She started just taking whatever jobs came her way, but soon she established herself as a very successful businesswoman, all the while raising 5 kids on her own. At the height of her business she had netted over 1.2 million, had 25 employees and a fleet of 12 minivans. Profit wise I think we took home $380k after taxes that year. The next year we bought 10 acres of property and hired contractors to build a $1.5 million house. I think midway though that year of 2007 is when the housing crisis hit. People who don't have homes to afford their mortgages definitely aren't paying for their non-existent houses to be cleaned. I think the wage went to $1822k that year, which was still fairly better than most people did. But we lost our house. The second house, sold all but one of the minivans, and even my mother's personal Escalade was given to the roofers just so we could pay them off since we had nothing to pay them with. I was never wealthy, but my grandparents were. They definitely worked their way up from working class. But by the time they were in their 80s and I was in my teens, they lived in a hotel room they bought out as a condo in one of the most expensive cities in America. They went on cruises multiple times a year, bought everyone lavish presents, etc. My brother and I were both heading towards college and the plan was for them to pay for most of it, and my middle class parents were relying on inheritance for a solid future. Then my grandpa died, and we found out he had been lying a bit about some of their finances. A blow, but no huge deal. Grandma would just have to watch her spending a bit. The big news came a bit later. My grandmother had invested a lot of money in diamonds. She always bought from the same guy at a very reputable jewelry store, and she had thousands and thousands of dollars worth of diamonds. One day the guy skipped town without a word and it was revealed everything he ever sold was fake. My grandma lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because suddenly all her diamonds were known frauds. She's old enough that she can kind of run on fumes for a while, but we're hardcore scrambling to figure out to do with no college payments or inheritance. If it's any consolation, even real diamonds would have been a terrible investment. Not me, but my parents. My dad is high up in a construction company, but my brother and I didn't quite get his brains. I was fresh out of college with a useless degree and my brother was at the bottom of the employee totem pole with no way to climb it. My dad decided to help us, more so my brother, out and bought a franchise. The warning signs were there within the first meeting with the company, as they refused to, and continued to refuse throughout our franchise ownership, to show us the books of the previous owner. They told us he moved to a different country, but we discovered he was still operating under their name and stealing our work. We told them about this. They didn't care. To show how shady this company is, someone accidentally deposited a large sum of money into our bank account and the company told us to keep it and use it to our advantage. We didn't. We had our bank reverse it. We would have some decent jobs, but the company would hold on to our money for at least 3 months before giving us it. They made us pay for the most ridiculous things. We had to pay a lot of money to advertise in a phone book that no one used anymore and never earned us any work. The company earned a cut from our advertisements. They threatened to sue us after accusing us of stealing money. We didn't. With no proof, so I threatened them back with a lawsuit as they were in violation of their own contract. After that, they bound us to a contract to never speak negatively about the company by name in public. My dad had to keep bailing the company out. He lost basically all of his savings and his chance to retire early. My mum quit her job to try and help the company out, as it was just my brother and I running it, so they lost her additional income too. On the day we told the company and everyone who needed to know that we were done, they still tried to get us to go to jobs. We had no gas in our van and no money in the business account to buy gas, but they still insisted we went. I refused and told them where to go. They still have thousands of pounds of the money we earned and are never going to hand it over. My dad lost all of his money because of a shady business that he only got involved in to give my brother a way out of a dead-end job. It worked out okay for my brother as he moved to a different country and earns a lot of money, whereas I had experience to get another job and met my now fiance as a result. My dad is building his money back up and my mum now does a lot of charity work. TL. DR. Dad bought a franchise for my brother and I. The franchise was shady and did everything they could to eat our profits. We told them to pee off and now my dad is building his money back up. Not wealthy myself, my dad was. When I was around 8 my father and all his brothers got around 600k each. It may seem not that much for Americans but where I live 600k is a fuckton. Not Bill Gates fuckton, but realm of possibility fuckton for sure. It means that as long as you have even a very basic job, you're set for life and never worry about money. He bought a restaurant with half of it. I'll let you guess how it ended. An in-law had a really big and expensive house, bought brand name clothing, and were going on vacations often. However, we were wondering where the money was coming from. For the in-law was a stay-at-home mom and her husband only made $50k a year. Turns out it was all through identity theft. Stole some SSNs and other info from several people. Got caught, sent to court and jail time. Although she only spent a year in jail, everything was taken away. Now, she and her family are living with her mom. Her children don't speak to her since she stole money from them. I don't know why the husband is still with her. I have a friend who was a very highly sought after saddle maker. His saddles sold in the $10,000 range. He had a ranch, property, horses. One day, some kids went terracing through his land and ran their trucks through a couple of barbed wire fences. This caused the horses to get mixed up, and some of the horses were fighting each other. So he comes home and discovers what has happened and he's trying to separate these sketchy horses and one of them kicks him in the face. It breaks his jaw, crushes in his cheekbones, and blinds him in one eye. He's all by himself, but he has a phone, but he can't talk. Somehow he manages to get an ambulance to come get him. The doctors were able to mostly reconstruct his face but it messed up his nerve control to the point where he can't do the fine leather and silver work he did before. The doctor bills cost so much that he lost his home and ranch. He mostly fixes up old cars for cash these days. Man, this was heartbreaking. I hope he was able to find peace in his life in some way. When I was a teenager, so like literally just a few years ago, I made an absurd amount of money through social media advertising. This optimistically naive 19-year-old took Wolf of Wall Street as more of a guide than a rare exception. And I've found that spend faster than you earn to motivate yourself to make more money is terrible advice. Social media changes so quickly and almost every way to make money has become easily replicable, so my ways of making money became obsolete after a few years. I still have maybe 25-30% of that original fortune and am a lot wiser with it now, thankfully, and following the wisdom of Scrooge McDuck more than Jordan Belfort. When I was a child, my mother donated $3 million to some kind of Scientologists or something. I never saw even a 1/10th of that amount of money again. I haven't seen 1/100th of that kind of money. Not me, but my grandparents. On my father's side they owned a series of bars in Texas, actually meeting because two of them were across from each other. But the constant access to booze led to a downfall and they ended up in a small converted garage as a house. Were great people who made most of each moment, but showed me the danger of alcohol. Mother's side was one of the founding partners of a well-known trucking company in the US. I can guarantee you've seen it. Grandfather, co-founder, left the company well off, but his 11 children fought over the money when they passed. Mother only wanted mementos after grandparents passed, but the money was a horrific rift in family. I never even seen most of mom's family, it was so bad. My father taught himself to program and during the computer boom, he created the first internet browser that was safe for kids to use. He sold the whole deal, rights and everything for $500,000. Mom decided she wanted the money and decided to divorce him. Dragged each other through court for 4 years until there was literally nothing left. All went to lawyers. By the time he finished his next project the market was saturated with computer crap and he never made that kind of money again. What a bee. Not really wealthy but was doing pretty good with a fantasy jewelry bussiness. But then a cartel struggle started and the city economy went to heck. Sales dropped to the point I was barely able to pay rent and salaries. Then one day a small guy Toto with two very menacing guys shows up offering protection for a monthly fee. It was at that point I decided to sell the bussiness for almost nothing and move back to my hometown. 2 weeks later they attempted to kidnap the guy who bought my bussiness. My great grandparents were fairly wealthy. According to my dad, they had so much gold it was everywhere, jewelry, furniture, etc. Then the communists took power in China. My grandfather's generation was so poor he almost starved to death. My late ex-uncle was a billionaire, I think. The family doesn't talk about him much, and I don't talk to the aunt who was married to him a lot. IDK how he made his money. I think it was mostly inherited. My aunt married him, and as a wedding present he gave her a commissioned painting of her by some extremely famous artist. He got hooked on hard drugs. My aunt divorced him after a while, and he died penniless on the streets according to my mom. He also got their 2 sons onto hard drugs, and one of them is now in a care home because he basically fried his brain, and the other was in and out of prison and has now also passed away, I believe. My aunt sold the wedding present painting and used the funds to start her own business, which she was very successful at. She is now a multimillionaire in her own right, ironically, as are most of the aunts on that side of the family, lol. I don't see her or any of the other rich aunts enough to ask them about their lives, and only hear about it third hand from my mom. My grandparents were never rich, but they were well off. Grandma came from money and grandpa came from nothing, but he worked his way up to being an executive. They had a nice house, new cars every 2 years, the money to do just about anything they wanted, and to help support my parents and me, they even helped buy my parents a house. Grandpa retired, but they had plenty of money in the bank and retirement funds. Only thing is, when grandpa retired he lost his health insurance. Not a big deal because Medicare kicked in for him. My grandma was a few months too young for it. But it was only a few months, right? Grandma got sick. She wasn't getting better, so they ran some tests. They found a brain tumor. This was the late 70s. They gave her excellent prognoses. The doctors said the surgery had a 98% survival rate. Lucky doesn't run in my family. If there was a contest with 3 people and 2 prizes, we would be the loser. Grandma didn't wake up from the surgery. She spent 3 months in the ICU. No insurance or any help from any government agency. It was the 70s and all they saw was a guy who owned his own home, a new car, and had money in the bank, so it took everything he had. That wasn't nailed down. He had to go back to work to keep the house and pay the bills. It didn't break him. He was the most incredible man I ever knew. He was so strong and smart and brave. I am still so proud of him for how he carried on after grandma died. She was the love of his life, and he never dated or remarried because no other woman was like her. And I married a man just like him. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.